I think the perception of the cloud is that it's sort of this magic. You have, in fact, I think the word cloud came because we would used to draw in those network drawings back in the prehistoric 90s, a picture of a cloud, which just meant the network.
Yeah.
So this whole problem of like data locality and having workloads in all these different places, why is that such a difficult problem to solve, and why aren't the public cloud providers able to solve that themselves?
Yeah. Well, so the abstraction that we create to understand things, just because we all drew a cloud on a piece of paper and said, okay, this is what the network looks like, doesn't mean that it actually looks that way. At the end of the day, most people don't actually understand the underlying technology that makes something that they are using work. And most of us don't understand what's going on inside of that little guy to make phone calls. Most of us don't understand what is going on in the network to make these communications happen. People today, the vast majority of people who use the internet, if you ask them, does it work better today than it did in 1997? They'd say, oh yeah, it works much, much better. If they had to explain to you why, they couldn't tell you that it's because of increased throughput at the edge in terms of broadband connectivity and the ubiquity of that expectation, plus networking protocols that have improved, plus the CDN, plus additional fiber capacity that so they couldn't explain to you why it is. They just know that it is. So the fact that this idea of the cloud has been abstracted to look like it's just everywhere. Well, it's accessible from everywhere, but that doesn't mean that it's equally accessible or accessible with the same level of performance from everywhere. And so the people who are really thinking about this problem are very often the DevOps teams or the kind of infrastructure engineering teams at the application companies who are tasked with making their application work well. The second part of your question of why can't the hyperscale clouds, the Amazons, the Microsofts, the Googles of the world just sort of say, great, we're going to go everywhere. Well, what happens is that they do in fact expand, and they do in fact acknowledge that they need to be in a lot more geographies than they started in order for this thing to work well. So they never said, hey, we're going to be able to make the entire application infrastructure of the world work out of Seattle. And when you look at the expansion that they've had over the last number of years, the hyperscale clouds tend to expand by 2 or 3 geographies every year. That's the way that's their plan. That's how they move up. And when they do, and they move into a new region, they build very large scale infrastructure in that region to support all of the hundreds of services that they offer and to support the large customer base that they expect to bring in there. They are building tens and tens and tens, if not hundreds of megawatts of data center capacity in new places that they would like to go. Our view is that application owners should absolutely be leveraging those facilities and the underlying technology stack that the hyperscalers have deployed in those facilities. And at the same time, the world's a really big place. And if you want to get close to users in lots and lots of other places around the world, the way that you want to do that is by having the access to the ultimate networks in terms of their space, power, connectivity, and capacity in particular markets. I was on the phone just yesterday with a data center group in Morocco. There's a big internet user population in Morocco, and I don't think AWS is getting there anytime soon. And we have a partnership with a data center operator in India who are currently in 7 different locations around the country. It turns out that being in 7 geographies going to probably 50 in India is a lot better than being in 1 that the kind of large cloud companies might end up giving you. And so that reality that these markets do in fact have outstanding service providers who want to be in that game of delivering applications and delivering to end users is what we are kind of riding on at Bridge. Our business is based on partnering with those service providers in lots of different markets around the world to utilize the infrastructure that they have in those markets to provide these types of services. That's what our business is based on. We are not building a cloud in that we are building data centers, buying servers and deploying them. We are building a cloud through partnership with service providers in lots of places around the world.
I see a couple of interesting parallels. This may sound like a tangent, but in my mind, it's really related. Of like, if anybody who's ever spent time in a developing country in Africa or someplace like that, you know, when I've done this in the past, I learned two things. And one is we take infrastructure for granted here in the West. You know, the streets always been paved. It just came from nature. And then you live somewhere where you actually see what happens when it's not taken care of. And I think that goes to your answer about the cloud picture, you know, drawing a picture of a cloud versus knowing how it actually works. You know, can you tell me where your water actually comes from, right? And that's that part. And the other part, which I think is where I'm starting to pick up from the story, is if you've been in a developing country, the hardest problem is last mile distribution of just about anything. Right? You can always get goods into a country, but to actually get it out to the far reaches of the country is a different problem. And it sounds like Ridge is kind of doing something like that for cloud services and resources.
So, you know, the last mile problem in connectivity and in the network world is one that has been talked about and that plays into so many different technologies. So in the early days of Akamai, one of the things that some of the sort of doubters about the CDN technologies would say is, well, won't ubiquitous broadband and lots of additional last mile capacity just solve this problem? And our answer was, no. That's going to make this problem much worse. If you give people a much bigger on and off ramp to a freeway, but you don't expand the freeway, you're not going to fix the problem. And if you give people a lot more connectivity to the network, what you're going to generate is a lot more demand. And if you still need to traipse all the way from, as in my first analogy, Tokyo, all the way back to Atlanta, to grab CNN.com content and bring it back to Tokyo. And now you have people wanting to do it more and more, wanting to do it at higher speeds, at higher resolutions for more hours per day. All you're doing is making that problem worse. And so that solution of putting the supply of, in the case of Akamai, the content, in the case of Ridge, the application infrastructure, in proximity to that expanded last mile capacity is the fix.